Rich parents mocked the humble ring that the boyfriend gave to his girlfriend. Months later, they discovered that the ring hid an unimaginable secret. Josh had learned to rise with the sun. Life in his small carpentry workshop taught him to be patient, to listen to the heartbeat of the wood beneath his hands as he created something new from what once seemed useless. That day, the fresh morning air brought with it a different promise. He didn't know it yet, but his destiny was about to intertwine with someone from a world completely foreign to his own. Josh had always been a simple young man, raised by his grandmother, after life took his parents from him in a tragic accident. Although his childhood was marked by pain, his grandmother, with her wisdom and unwavering love, had taught him not to fear hard work and to cherish what truly mattered: humility, family, and honest labor. The carpentry workshop was his refuge, a place where he could breathe life into each piece of wood with his calloused but skilled hands. That morning, while loading some tools into his truck, he thought about the day's work ahead. He had been hired to restore several antique furniture pieces donated for a charity event at one of the city's most prestigious venues. The kind of events where he, a simple working man, would only be invisible. And yet, he felt proud to contribute something with his talent, even if it was from the shadows. On the other side of the city, in a magnificent mansion adorned with luxuries, Megan Smith was preparing for the same event, but with a completely different purpose. Since childhood, Megan had been educated in the finest schools, surrounded by wealth and attention. Yet, in her heart, there was always a void that no jewel or social event could fill. Although her parents, Richard and Victoria Smith, had prepared her to live in a world of appearances and privileges, she longed for something different, an authentic life where she could be free to be herself and not what others expected. This charity event was one of the few opportunities Megan found to escape, even if just for a brief moment, from her parents' rigid expectations. Volunteering allowed her to experience a side of life she rarely encountered, where she could do something beyond attending endless gala dinners and exclusive events. When Megan arrived at the event venue, she greeted some familiar faces before heading to the preparation area, where volunteers organized donated items for the auction. There, among antique furniture and dusty objects, her eyes met those of a man working with focused devotion, breathing new life into a worn wooden table. That man was Josh. Unbeknownst to her, Megan felt drawn to his presence. There was something about him that contrasted with everything she knew. While others moved about the space with elegance and superficiality, Josh worked quietly, with a calmness and humility that intrigued her. Perhaps it was the way his skilled hands caressed the wood, or maybe the focus in his clear eyes, but Megan felt compelled to approach. "That table is looking beautiful," she said with a shy smile, breaking the silence as she watched Josh gently sand the edge of the table. Josh looked up, surprised that someone had stopped to talk to him, especially someone like her. Dressed in elegant attire and moving with a grace that only someone from high society could possess, Megan was everything his world was not. "Thank you," Josh replied with a modest smile, glancing down at the table. "It's an antique piece, but it has character. It just needs a little care to shine again." Megan moved a bit closer, observing the details of his work. It was not like the new, modern furniture that adorned her parents' mansion, but there was something special about that restored table, something that made her feel more real, more alive. "Do you do this for a living?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Yes," Josh responded. "I'm a carpenter, and restoring antique pieces is something I really enjoy. I've always believed that old doesn't mean useless. Everything has its story. You just have to know how to see it." That response resonated deeply within Megan. How many times had she felt that her own life was a facade, filled with shiny new things, but devoid of meaning? "That's a beautiful way to look at it," she said, feeling a connection she couldn't explain. In that moment, she knew she wanted to learn more about this man. The rest of the day passed with casual conversations and furtive glances. Every word they exchanged seemed to bring them closer, as if their worlds, so opposite, began to intertwine in those small gestures. As the evening fell and the event was drawing to a close, Megan said goodbye with a smile that promised to be the beginning of something more. Josh watched her walk away, knowing that this woman was not like others he usually encountered. Megan Smith had left a mark on his heart, though he couldn't yet know how profound that feeling would become. When Josh returned to his modest home that night, his grandmother noticed something different about him. His eyes sparkled in a way she hadn't seen before. "Something special happened today?" the elderly woman asked, a wise smile on her lips. Josh simply smiled, but in his mind, Megan's image lingered. Something inside him told him that this encounter was not coincidental. Perhaps life was presenting him with a path he had never imagined he would walk. Megan, for her part, returned to her luxurious mansion, but the glimmer of the jewels and expensive adornments surrounding her no longer impressed her as before. That night, as she undressed, she remembered Josh's hands working on that table, the dedication and love he poured into every detail. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had found something genuine. That night, both went to sleep thinking about what had occurred. Two worlds so different, yet with an undeniable connection that was just beginning to take shape. In the days following that first encounter, emotions swirled for Josh and Megan. They both felt that something profound had been born between them. For Megan, it was the first time in her life she was experiencing an authentic connection, something she couldn't find in the opulent halls filled with superficial people that populated her world. For Josh, despite being aware of the class difference that separated them, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Her smile, the way she listened with genuine interest when he spoke about his carpentry and his simple life. Their meetings became more frequent. Initially, they only chatted while Josh worked on the furniture that needed restoring, but over time, they began to meet outside that environment. They gathered in modest cafes, away from the inquisitive gazes of Megan's acquaintances, or strolled through the city parks, where they could talk without worry. Megan felt alive alongside Josh, free from the constraints her family had imposed on her life. With him, she didn't have to pretend. She didn't have to maintain a perfect image or worry about the expectations of high society. Josh introduced her to a different world where material things weren't the most important, and that brought her closer to the life she had always desired. For Josh, being with Megan was like living a dream he had never thought possible. He knew she came from a completely different world, one that didn't understand or share his values, but his love for her was sincere and profound. He didn't want to impress her with something he was not. Instead, he aimed to offer her what he had: his honesty, his dedication, and his unconditional affection. After months of secret meetings and shared moments, Josh decided to take a step further. For weeks, he had been saving everything he could, thinking of a future with Megan. And while he knew he couldn't afford an expensive ring, he had something far more valuable, something that carried the weight of his family history: his mother's ring. This ring had been in Josh's family for generations, and his grandmother had kept it carefully after the death of his parents. It wasn't an extravagant ring, nor did it have precious stones, but for Josh, it represented something invaluable. It was the symbol of the love that united his parents, and before that, his grandparents. A legacy of unity he wanted to share with Megan. One afternoon, while they strolled through the park, Josh stopped beneath an old oak tree, taking a deep breath before pulling out the small box he had brought with him. "Megan, I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. Since I met you, I haven't stopped thinking about how my life changed with you in it," he said, his heart pounding in his chest. Megan looked at him with curiosity, sensing that something special was about to happen. "Josh, I feel the same. You are the most authentic thing in my life," she replied, taking his hand. Josh slowly knelt down, opening the box to reveal the modest ring. "It's not an expensive ring, nor is it made of gold or luxurious stones, but it's my mother's ring. I've kept it with great care, waiting for the right moment to give it to the woman I love. And that's you, Megan. Will you marry me?" Megan felt tears welling in her eyes. For her, this ring was not a symbol of status, but of something much purer. The true love Josh offered her. Without hesitation, she accepted. "Yes, Josh, of course I will." The happiness between them was palpable. For Megan, that ring was worth more than any jewel her parents could have given her. Josh, on the other hand, felt that despite all the differences, their love had triumphed. However, they both knew that this intimate and special moment would soon be put to the test. Weeks later, the day arrived when Megan and Josh would have to face the judgment of her parents. Richard and Victoria Smith had not hidden their disdain for the relationship from the beginning, but now that the engagement was on the table, the situation would be even more difficult. A dinner at the magnificent Smith mansion was organized so that Josh and Megan could finally speak openly about their future together. Josh, though nervous, was determined to be honest and show that even though he didn't have the wealth of the Smith family, his love for Megan was genuine and worth more than any fortune. The mansion, with its golden chandeliers, enormous paintings, and antique furniture, was a stark reminder of the world to which Josh did not belong. As he walked through the grand hall, he felt small, as if every object reminded him of his humility. But his love for Megan kept him grounded. During dinner, superficial conversations filled the air until Victoria could no longer contain herself and turned her attention to the ring Megan was wearing. "Megan, dear," she said in a cold, calculating tone, her eyes fixed on the small jewel adorning her daughter's finger. "I see you've decided on something peculiar. You're not pretending to be humble, are you?" she added with a sarcastic smile, insinuating that the ring was unworthy of her status. Richard, always more direct, let out a dry laugh as he exaggeratedly cut his meat. "Is that the engagement ring he gave you?" he asked, openly mocking her. "I thought he'd at least try for something better, something that reflected your true worth." The words struck Josh like a dagger. He knew the ring wasn't ostentatious, but he never imagined it would be so scorned. Megan tried to intervene, but the atmosphere had turned tense and hostile. "Mom, Dad, this ring means much more than you think. It's not about its price, it's about what it represents for Josh and me," Megan said, trying to defend her fiancé's gesture of love. But Richard and Victoria didn't see it that way. For them, Megan's marriage was a social transaction, an opportunity to strengthen alliances and maintain their power. And Josh, with his humble life, was a threat to that vision. Josh, in silence, tried to keep his composure. But inside, he felt humiliated. He knew he couldn't compete with the Smith family's riches, but he never imagined that something so intimate and meaningful as his mother's ring would be ridiculed. When dinner ended, tensions were higher than ever. Megan, upset with her parents, tried to console Josh, but she knew her words couldn't erase what had happened. That night, when Josh returned home, he stared at his workshop, the place that had always been his refuge. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if he was truly enough for Megan. The words of her parents echoed in his mind. Could they really build a future together, or would their class differences end up destroying what they had built? As he lay down in bed, the weight of the Smiths' words kept him awake. Josh was determined not to succumb to the pain, but deep within, a doubt began to take root, a doubt that would change the course of his decisions. Megan, for her part, also felt torn. She knew she loved Josh, but the pressure from her parents was starting to weigh more than she expected. The friction between her love and her family's expectations was only beginning to intensify. The words of Richard and Victoria Smith echoed in Josh's mind like a persistent echo. Since that dinner at the mansion, the weight of humiliation had accompanied him day and night. Each mockery, each sarcastic laugh directed at the ring he had given Megan, had slowly eroded his confidence. To him, that ring was a symbol of love and the history of his family, something sacred. But to Megan's parents, it was merely an insignificant piece, a reminder of his humble origins. That day, sitting in his workshop, with wood in front of him and the sound of the hammer echoing, Josh couldn't concentrate. Never before had he felt so deeply the difference between his life and Megan's. The workshop, which used to be his refuge, now felt small and suffocating. His mind was elsewhere, dwelling on the cruel words of Megan's parents, on her expression as she tried to defend him. Could he really give Megan the life she deserved? Doubt settled in his chest like a dark shadow. Meanwhile, in the magnificent Smith mansion, the situation was not much better. Megan felt the growing pressure from her parents. She knew her love for Josh was real, but the conflict between her family and him was wearing her down more and more. Since that night, her parents had seized every opportunity to imply that she had made a mistake, that she could correct it in time. "Megan, darling," Victoria began one morning as they had breakfast in the enormous dining room of the mansion, "you know we want the best for you. We always have. And you've earned the right to a life that matches your status. You can't pretend that such a simple ring represents who you are." Richard, without looking up from his newspaper, added, "Do you really think a man like Josh can offer you a worthy life? Don't you see what it cost us to build what we have?" he said with a cutting tone. "Megan, he doesn't belong to our world." Megan, trying to contain her frustration, set her coffee cup on the table with a soft thud. "This isn't about worlds, Dad. It's about love. What I have with Josh is real. It's something that goes beyond what you think I need." Victoria sighed, shaking her head with a mix of disapproval and condescension. "Love, dear, doesn't pay the bills. It won't give you the stability you need. What can Josh offer you? What exactly? A life of humility? You've had everything. You should aspire to more." Megan felt her parents' words starting to wear her down. Although she loved Josh deeply, the constant pressure from her family was gradually allowing doubts to seep into her mind. She wanted to be with him, but the weight of familial expectations and criticisms began to affect her more than she admitted. Josh, for his part, was also grappling with his own internal conflict. That afternoon, when his friend Thomas stopped by his workshop, Josh couldn't help but vent. "I don't know if I'm enough for her, Thomas," Josh confessed, hitting the wood harder than necessary. "Her family doesn't see me as worthy. The ring I gave her, to them, it means nothing. I feel like everything I am isn't enough." Thomas, who had noticed how his friend seemed to drift away since he started seeing Megan, remained silent for a few seconds. The jealousy that had begun to fester in his heart after Josh's engagement made him feel uncomfortable. They had been inseparable for years, almost like brothers, but since Josh had committed to a woman like Megan, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his friend was leaving him behind. Even though Josh hadn't changed, Thomas couldn't rid himself of the feeling of inferiority that tormented him. "Josh, look," Thomas began, trying to conceal his own frustration. "I know you love Megan, but her family is different. They don't see the world like you do. And maybe, I don't know, perhaps you shouldn't try to fit in where you don't belong." Thomas's words, though spoken in a low and measured tone, left a deep mark on Josh. He had always trusted Thomas, considered him almost like a brother, but hearing that from his friend only heightened his uncertainty. Was Thomas right? Was he trying to enter a world that would completely reject him? Was he dragging Megan into a life full of unnecessary conflicts? That night, Josh returned home feeling more lost than ever. His grandmother, who had always had the ability to read his emotions, watched him in silence as they had dinner. "Josh, what's bothering you, son?" she asked softly, breaking the silence of the night. Josh, tired of keeping everything to himself, sighed deeply. "It's Megan. Her family doesn't accept me, Grandma, and I don't know if I can truly give her the life she deserves. Every time I'm with her, I feel like I'm asking too much, like I'm dragging her into a life that shouldn't be hers." His grandmother looked at him carefully, with that wise gaze only years can grant. Josh, life isn't about what you can offer materially. It's about what you can build together. True love isn't based on wealth or possessions. If Megan loves you, what you need to do is fight for that love together, not doubt it. There will always be people who try to make you feel less. But you must remember that a person's worth isn't in what they have, but in who they are. Her words brought some relief to Josh, but doubt didn't completely fade. The words of Megan's parents continued to resonate in his mind, along with Thomas's comments. On the other side of the city, Megan was also struggling with her own thoughts. As she looked in the mirror, observing Josh's ring on her finger, she felt a mix of pride and doubt. She loved him, there was no question about that. But the pressure from her parents, the expectation of leading a life of luxury and comfort, made her wonder if Josh would be enough for her in the long run. Could they overcome the differences that separated them? In the following days, tensions between Megan and her parents escalated. Victoria and Richard did not cease their attempts to convince her that she was making a mistake. They even began suggesting other suitors from their social circle, men who, according to them, could offer her everything Josh couldn't. For Megan, those insinuations were unbearable. She wanted nothing to do with those men, but each comment pushed her further away from her family and, unfortunately, began to erode her confidence about her future with Josh. During a meeting with Josh a few days later, Megan tried to hide the pressure she felt, but her discomfort was palpable. They had met at a small cafe, away from the city's noise, but the emotional distance between them was evident. Josh, always attentive, immediately noticed that something was wrong. "Are you okay, Megan?" he asked, searching for her gaze. Megan looked down at her coffee cup, playing with the spoon between her hands. "It's just my parents. They won't stop pressuring me, Josh. They don't understand how I feel about you. All they do is try to convince me that this relationship isn't right for me, for my future. And sometimes, I don't know. They make me doubt." Josh felt like a dagger had pierced his chest. Megan's words, though not spoken directly, revealed something he feared. Doubts had begun to infiltrate her heart. Although she loved him, the constant pressure from her family was starting to chip away at her confidence. "Megan, Josh tried to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he hadn't imagined it would be so painful. They both remained silent for a few minutes, looking outside the cafe, where people continued with their lives, oblivious to the problems they faced. That silence was more revealing than any word. Josh and Megan, although deeply in love, were beginning to feel the weight of the differences between their worlds. And as doubts grew in both their hearts, the tensions began to shake the foundations of what they believed to be an unbreakable love. The relationship between Josh and Megan continued to wobble as doubts tangled in their hearts. The tensions between their love and the social expectations from Megan's family only intensified, as if a dark cloud loomed over them. But for Richard and Victoria Smith, that doubt which was starting to erode their daughter's confidence was exactly what they needed. They knew that her love for Josh was still strong, but they also understood that constant pressure could weaken it, and they were determined to exploit that crack. "Richard, we can't wait any longer. If we don't do something soon, Megan will make a decision that she won't be able to undo," said Victoria, her calculating gaze fixed on her husband. Richard, seated in his spacious office, nodded while looking over a document with the logo of a private detective agency in the corner. He hadn't mentioned the matter for days, but he decided it was time to act. He knew that to separate Josh from his daughter, he would need more than disdain. He needed evidence, something solid that could discredit him in Megan's eyes. "I've hired a detective," Richard said without looking up from his papers. "I want to know everything about Josh, his past, his weaknesses. I'm sure there's something we're overlooking. Someone like him can't be perfect." Victoria smiled, satisfied with the plan. To her, Josh had always been an opportunist, a man who saw in her daughter an easy entry into a world of luxury. She was convinced they would discover something shady in his past, something that could make Megan walk away from him for good. "It's an excellent idea," Victoria replied, clasping her hands in her lap. "If we find something that disqualifies him, Megan won't have any choice but to see the reality. Sometimes, the truth is more powerful than any words we can say to her." Richard didn't need to be told twice. He was a businessman, accustomed to getting what he wanted, and this time would be no different. In his mind, the love his daughter felt for Josh was nothing more than an obstacle to the future he had planned for her, a future filled with strategic alliances, power, and prestige. And Josh, with his simple life, did not fit into those plans. As Megan's parents set their plan in motion, the relationship between Josh and Thomas continued to deteriorate. What once had been an unbreakable friendship was now in danger of breaking apart forever. Thomas, increasingly resentful, watched from a distance as Josh, his old friend, seemed to be climbing socially through his relationship with Megan. The envy that had begun as a slight discomfort was transforming into a darker and more destructive feeling. Thomas couldn't help but feel that he was losing Josh, not just because of the love Josh felt for Megan, but also due to the difference in status that now separated them. They no longer shared the same humble life. Josh, although he remained the same person in many ways, was being absorbed into Megan's world, a world to which Thomas didn't belong. One afternoon, while Thomas was walking through the neighborhood, he spotted Victoria Smith exiting a store. He didn't know her personally, but had seen her several times at local events. Upon seeing him, Victoria, always astute and observant, recognized him as Josh's friend. In that moment, she saw an opportunity to further her plan. "Thomas, right?" Victoria asked, approaching him with a calculated smile. Thomas, surprised that she recognized him, nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Smith. How can I help you?" Victoria wasted no time in deploying her charm. With her soft tone and penetrating gaze, she hinted that her family was concerned about Megan's relationship with Josh. She spoke carefully, playing with his emotions, suggesting that perhaps Thomas knew details about Josh that could help protect Megan. "We know Josh is your friend," Victoria said, "but we also understand that this relationship is causing problems for everyone. We want the best for our daughter, and I believe you can help us ensure that she doesn't make a mistake. I know you want what's best for Josh, but do you really think this life is right for him? Don't you think he's getting into something he won't understand?" Victoria's words began to plant more doubts in Thomas's mind. His loyalty to Josh was being tested. Initially, he tried to resist, but Victoria's manipulation, combined with his own feelings of inferiority and envy, began to take its toll. Victoria knew exactly how to push the right buttons. "We just need to know more about Josh. Maybe there's something he hasn't told you," Victoria suggested, leaving the insinuation hanging in the air. Thomas, sensing he might finally have a place in this conflict, began to consider the offer. He wasn't sure if what he was doing was right, but in his heart, guilt and resentment mixed. He felt that Josh was changing, drifting away from the life they had shared, and the idea of collaborating with Victoria made him feel less insignificant. That same night, while Josh was working late in his workshop, Thomas visited him with an attitude that Josh couldn't decipher. Their conversation was tense, filled with awkward silences. Thomas knew he was betraying his friend by collaborating with Victoria, but his frustration overwhelmed him. Josh, oblivious to what was happening, sensed the growing distance between them, but didn't know how to confront it. The next day, Richard and Victoria received the first report from the private detective. Although it contained no shocking scandals, it mentioned some details that could be useful in discrediting Josh. But what truly caught Victoria's attention was a small paragraph about the ring that Josh had given to Megan. The detective noted that the ring was not simply a humble piece of jewelry. It had a story behind it, a connection to an ancient noble family that had fallen from grace. "This is interesting," Victoria said, reading the report carefully. "It seems this ring might be more valuable than we thought." Richard, who was reviewing other documents, looked up with interest. "Valuable? In what way?" The detective mentions that the ring could have some connection to a noble family. It might not have significant economic value, but if we dig a little deeper, we could find something worthwhile. Perhaps this ring is the key to opening doors we hadn't considered, Victoria said, her mind already beginning to plot new ideas. Richard leaned forward, intrigued by the possibility. What had initially been just a matter of pride and status was now transforming into an opportunity to gain something more. If the ring truly had some historical value or a connection to hidden wealth, they could use it to their advantage. The situation, far from resolving itself, was beginning to become more complex and dangerous. Josh, for his part, continued to feel that something in his life was changing. The tension with Megan, the growing distance from Thomas, and now this feeling that something larger was about to collapse around him, made him feel increasingly out of place. Megan, caught between her love for Josh and her family's pressure, also began to notice her parents' change in attitude. There was something different about them, an interest that didn't seem directly related to Josh as a person, but rather to something he possessed. In the following days, Megan's parents' plan would advance without her or Josh knowing. Richard and Victoria's hidden intentions began to solidify, while Thomas, caught in a web of lies and manipulation, drifted further away from his old friend, unable to resist the temptation to contribute to the destruction of what Josh had built. The road to the truth was filled with shadows, and Josh and Megan were about to face the first blows of a much darker plot than they could imagine. The atmosphere in Josh's life seemed to be changing, but not in the way he had envisioned. The days passed slowly, burdened with a tension he couldn't shake. Conversations with Megan became increasingly brief, as if an invisible barrier was rising between them. Despite their love, external doubts and pressures began to erode what had once been an unbreakable bond. That morning, Josh felt the weight of uncertainty in his chest as he worked in his workshop. The hurtful words from Megan's parents still echoed in his mind. Despite Megan's attempts to defend him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't enough, that he couldn't give her the life she deserved. The expectations of the Smiths crushed him, and the growing distance from his best friend Thomas only heightened his sense of isolation. Feeling that he needed advice and clarity, Josh decided to visit the only person who had always supported him, his grandmother. She had been his pillar throughout his life, the figure who raised and guided him after the tragedy that marked his childhood. Although she was not a woman of many words, her wisdom was undeniable, and Josh knew he needed her guidance. Upon arriving at the modest house where he grew up, Josh was welcomed with a warm smile and a comforting hug. In that moment, he felt a relief he hadn't experienced in weeks. Josh's grandmother, an elderly woman with a vibrant gaze, watched him closely as they sat down to have tea in the small kitchen. "I can see you're worried, Josh. What's troubling you?" she asked softly, though her tone was filled with understanding. She knew her grandson was carrying something heavy on his shoulders. Josh sighed, dropping his head into his hands for a moment before speaking. "It's Megan, Grandma. I love her, but her family doesn't accept me. They humiliated me for the ring I gave her, for our humble life. They made me feel like I'm not enough for her, that I never will be. And Megan, even though she tries to defend me, I know she feels the pressure. I don't know if I can handle it." His grandmother listened in silence for a few moments, allowing his words to linger in the air. Then, with a serene smile, she stood up and walked over to a small cupboard, retrieving a worn wooden box that had aged over the years. "Josh," she began as she opened the box, "there's something I didn't tell you when I gave you your mother's ring, not because I didn't want to, but because I thought it wasn't the right time. But now, I believe it's time for you to know the whole truth." Josh looked at her with curiosity, momentarily setting aside his worries. The grandmother pulled out the ring he had given to Megan, a modest piece but filled with significance. At first glance, it was just a simple ring, but what his grandmother was about to reveal would change everything he thought he knew about his family. "This ring has been in our family for generations. It's not just your mother's ring. It once belonged to your grandfather and his father before him. What you didn't know is that your great-grandfather and his family before him were part of an ancient noble dynasty in our country, a powerful family that fell from grace long ago. Josh stood in shock. A noble dynasty. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. But Grandma, we've never been wealthy. We've always lived modestly, he said, confused. His grandmother nodded slowly, her eyes filled with memories. That's true, my son. Our family lost everything amidst betrayals and internal struggles. Many years ago, your great-grandfather was betrayed by those close to him, leading to the family's ruin. The ring is the only thing left from that time. It's a symbol of what we once were, of a legacy that was lost over time. But what matters most is that this ring doesn't have extraordinary economic value at first glance. Its value lies in the history it represents. It's a reminder of what our family endured, of what sacrifice and loss mean, and how, despite everything, we move forward. Josh felt the weight of his grandmother's words sinking in. What he had thought was just a simple family ring was now revealed to be a symbol of a much deeper and complex past, a legacy that had remained hidden for generations. He realized then that the ring not only represented the love of his parents, but also a connection to a history that went beyond what he had ever imagined. So, Josh began, trying to process everything, this ring isn't just a gift from my mother. It's part of something much bigger. That's right, his grandmother replied, placing a hand over his. And now that you know, it's your decision what to do with this information. But remember, your worth, Josh, isn't in what you possess or the wealth of this ring. It's in your heart, in who you are as a person. That's what your mother and your grandfather always wanted you to remember. Josh, deeply moved by what he had heard, remained silent for a moment. His doubts and fears still lingered, but now he had a new perspective. The ring he had given to Megan was not just a simple piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of love, sacrifice, and a story that was still unfolding. Back at the Smith mansion, things were moving quietly but calculatedly. Victoria, who had received the detective's report, began to plot her next move. She knew the ring had value beyond the economic, and she was determined to uncover all the secrets it held. "Richard," Victoria said one afternoon as they sat in their private study, "the detective has discovered something interesting about Josh's ring. It has a history, a connection to a noble family that fell from grace. This could be bigger than we thought." Richard, always interested in power and opportunities, frowned as he listened. "Do you think we can leverage this to our advantage?" Victoria smiled with her usual cunning. "Of course. If we investigate further, we might find some connection to an ancient fortune. And if that's the case, Josh could be more useful than we think." Meanwhile, Megan, unaware of her parents' machinations, also began to notice that something had changed in Josh. The pressure from her family was wearing her down, but her love for Josh remained strong. However, in recent days, she felt that Josh was becoming more distant, as if he carried a secret he had yet to share with her. Finally, one night, while they strolled through the park, Josh decided to tell her everything his grandmother had revealed. "Megan, there's something I need to tell you," he began, taking her hand as they walked along the tree-lined path. "The ring I gave you, it's not just a family heirloom. It has a history I never told you because I didn't know it until recently." Megan looked at him with curiosity, saying nothing, waiting for him to continue. "This ring is part of a legacy that comes from my great-grandfather, who belonged to a noble family. A family that lost everything due to betrayals and internal struggles. What I thought was just a relic from my mother is actually a symbol of what we once were and what was lost over time." Megan stopped, looking at him in astonishment. "Josh, that's incredible. I had no idea your family had such a rich history." Her tone was one of genuine admiration, but also concern. "But what does this mean for us? What are you going to do with this information?" Josh, although he still didn't have all the answers, knew one thing for certain. I don't completely know yet, but what I do know is that this ring is part of who we are, of what we're building together. It won't change how I feel about you, but I think we need to discover more, not just for us, but for my family and everything it represents. The wind blew fiercely that morning at the Smith mansion, but inside the luxurious office of Richard and Victoria, the atmosphere was much colder than the autumn weather battering the windows. Victoria, with a calculating look, flipped through the pages of the report she had just received from the private detective they had hired to investigate Josh. In the first few pages, there was nothing surprising. Josh was a hard-working man, dedicated to his craft, with no significant scandals in his life. However, what caught her attention was on the last pages. "Richard, come see this," Victoria said, her eyes shining with a mix of cunning and intrigue. Richard, who was reviewing some financial documents at his desk, approached with curiosity. Victoria pointed to the paragraph where the detective discussed the ring that Josh had given to Megan. "Look here. The detective mentions that the ring Josh gave to Megan has historical value. It's not just an ordinary family jewel. It's linked to an ancient noble family that fell from grace several generations ago. This ring could be worth much more than we thought," Victoria said, her lips curling into a smile that revealed her intentions. Richard frowned, intrigued. "A noble family? And why has no one mentioned this before?" Victoria closed the report, crossing her arms as she leaned back in her chair. "Because Josh's family lost everything generations ago. Apparently, his ancestors were part of a dynasty that was betrayed from within. Their fortune disappeared, and the only thing that remained was this ring. But if we investigate further, we might uncover something much bigger. Perhaps there's something we can use to our advantage." Richard, ever pragmatic and looking for opportunities, immediately saw the potential in the situation. If the ring was connected to an ancient fortune or properties that could be reclaimed, Josh might be sitting on a gold mine without even knowing it. And of course, if he were the only descendant of that family, Richard and Victoria could use that information to their benefit. "We need to know more," Richard said decisively. "If this ring is the key to recovering a lost fortune, we could take advantage of it. Josh is naive. He has no idea what he possesses. We could manipulate the situation so that Megan claims what belongs to her. And along the way, we make sure she's not with him for love, but for what really matters." Victoria nodded, satisfied with her husband's vision. She knew this was about more than just disapproval of Josh. If they played their cards right, they could control everything related to Josh's past and use that information to get what they wanted. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Josh and Megan were still grappling with their own challenges. Although Josh had revealed to Megan the truth about the ring and the family legacy his grandmother had told him about, the uncertainty of what that meant for their future still weighed heavily on them. Josh felt that there was a deeper story to uncover, but the constant pressure from the Smiths left them no room to breathe. Megan, though excited by Josh's discovery, was also starting to notice a change in her parents' attitude. There was something different about them, a kind of interest that hadn't been present before. Although they continued to criticize her relationship with Josh, their comments seemed less biting, as if they were waiting for something. This suspicion unsettled her, but she didn't yet know what they were plotting. That afternoon, while Josh worked in his workshop, Thomas stopped by to visit him. Since their last conversation, Josh had sensed a growing distance between them, but he still considered Thomas his best friend, someone he could trust. However, what Josh didn't know was that Thomas, consumed by jealousy and manipulated by the Smiths, had begun to yield to the pressure. "How are you, Josh?" Thomas asked, entering the workshop with his hands in his pockets. "I'm good, working on some furniture. What about you?" "I haven't seen much of you lately," Josh replied, pausing for a moment to observe his friend. Thomas, uncomfortable with the guilt he carried inside, tried to maintain a casual conversation, but couldn't help but bring up the topic that tormented him. "I've been busy," he said, before revealing the true reason for his visit. Josh, I've been hearing rumors about that ring you gave to Megan. People say it might be worth much more than it seems. Is it true that it has a connection to a noble family? Josh looked at him with a mix of surprise and distrust. He hadn't shared that information with many people, only Megan and his grandmother. How did Thomas know about the ring? Where did you hear that? Josh asked, frowning. Thomas, feeling trapped, tried to sound nonchalant. People talk, you know. You can't hide much in a neighborhood like ours, but I'm surprised you didn't tell me before. I mean, we're friends, right? Josh felt a pang of distrust. Something about Thomas's demeanor didn't sit right with him. He wasn't the same friend he had known all his life. There was something in his tone, something in his words, that he didn't like. Thomas, I would have told you if I had thought it was important. But it's not something I want to broadcast. It's a personal and family matter. I don't want it to interfere with what truly matters to me and Megan, Josh said, his tone firm yet calm. Thomas, feeling uncomfortable and aware that he was betraying his friend, quickly changed the subject and bid farewell in a hurry. Josh watched him leave, wondering what was going on in his friend's mind. That same night, Victoria and Richard decided to move forward with their plan. They knew that in order to control Josh and take advantage of the situation, they needed to feign a change in attitude. If they could convince Megan that they accepted Josh and were interested in his well-being, they could get closer to the ring and the story behind it. During dinner at the Smith mansion, Victoria adopted a friendlier tone than usual, something Megan noticed immediately. Megan, your father and I have been thinking, Victoria began, with a seemingly sincere smile. Perhaps we've been too hard on Josh. If he makes you happy, we're willing to make an effort to accept him. Megan, surprised by her mother's sudden change of attitude, frowned, unsure whether to trust her words. Really? She asked, clearly skeptical. Richard, joining the conversation, nodded seriously. We want what's best for you, Megan, and if that means accepting Josh, then we will. Maybe we didn't understand it at first, but we're willing to get to know him better, to learn more about his family, his history, and that ring you gave him. The mention of the ring made Megan tense up. Now she was certain that there was something more behind this sudden change in attitude. Why did they care so much about the ring? She knew her parents were calculating, and although she wanted to believe they were genuinely willing to change, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. As dinner continued, Megan's distrust towards her parents grew. She knew she had to warn Josh. Something was happening, and she feared her parents were planning something that could jeopardize everything they had built together. The nights became longer for Josh. Since his grandmother had revealed the truth about the ring, his mind could not find rest. The weight of that fallen legacy haunted him, and while he loved Megan with all his heart, there was now a new responsibility that troubled him, to uncover the full truth behind the ring, his family, and what that connection to the ancient nobility truly meant. Something told him that everything was incomplete, that the answers he had so far were merely a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Megan, for her part, felt trapped in a silent battle between her family and the man she loved. Although the Smiths seemed to have softened their attitude towards Josh, she knew her parents were not the type to give in so easily, especially when the ring, that humble object that meant so much to Josh, had become the center of their interest. Megan wrestled with her growing suspicion towards her parents and her desire to protect Josh. One afternoon, as they walked through the park where they used to stroll, Josh broke the silence that had marked their recent days together. Megan, I need to know more about my family, about the ring. I feel like I don't know the whole story, and that there's something more my grandmother didn't tell me, maybe because she doesn't know it herself. This ring has more secrets than it seems, and I can't live with this uncertainty, he said, staring intently at the ring on Megan's finger. Megan, who had been waiting for Josh to bring up the subject, nodded in understanding. I know, Josh. I've felt it too. My parents are too interested in the ring. Something doesn't add up. Perhaps that connection to your noble family is more important than we thought. And I think they won't stop until they get whatever they believe is tied to that ring." Josh pressed his lips together. He knew that the only way to protect his relationship and his future with Megan was to confront the past. He had to uncover the whole truth. "My grandmother told me about an old abandoned villa that once belonged to my family. It's a place that has been empty for decades, covered by neglect, just like everything else. If we want answers, I think that's where we need to start," Josh said with determination. Megan, without hesitation, took Josh's hand. "Let's go together. Whatever we find, we'll face it as we always have, together." The next day, they set off. With directions from Josh's grandmother, they embarked on a journey to the villa, a remote place on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by nature that had overrun what was once a grand residence. As they drove along the winding road, tension grew between them. They didn't know exactly what to expect, but a feeling of mystery enveloped them, as if the past were calling out to them. When they finally arrived, the sight before them was both desolate and imposing. The villa, once a splendid mansion, lay in ruins. Vegetation had taken over, and the moss-covered walls seemed on the verge of collapse. Yet, despite the abandonment, the structure still retained a silent dignity, as if it held secrets that time could not erase. "This place," Megan murmured as they surveyed the exterior. "It's incredible to think that your family lived here, Josh, that this was their home." Josh, with a heavy heart, nodded as he pushed open the heavy wooden door, which creaked in protest. Inside, the air was thick with dust and forgotten memories. Everything was in a state of neglect, but as he walked through the dark hallways, Josh felt a strange familiarity, as if he were following in the footsteps of his ancestors. They explored several rooms, searching for any clues that might reveal more about the history of the ring and the downfall of Josh's family. Finally, in a small room in the furthest wing of the villa, they found what they were looking for: an old diary, covered in dust and hidden within a wooden box beneath the worn floorboards. As Josh opened it, the yellowed pages began to unveil fragments of a story much more complex than he had imagined. The diary belonged to Manuel de la Vega, Josh's great-grandfather, who wrote about the last days before the family's fall. The pages recounted how the family had been betrayed by those closest to them, friends who sold out for the highest bidder and caused the dynasty's ruin. But most importantly, the diary spoke of a hidden treasure, a legacy that had been protected for generations, and according to Manuel's words, could only be found by those who bore the family ring. "A treasure?" Megan asked, surprised. "Did your family hide a treasure?" Josh gazed at the pages, incredulous, but also feeling that everything was beginning to make sense. "It seems so. My great-grandfather wrote that the ring was the key to finding it, something that has been hidden for generations, waiting for the right moment to be discovered," Josh explained, turning the pages with trembling hands. Megan leaned closer to him, examining the diary with intent. "So if this is true, the ring you gave me isn't just a symbol of love. It's the key that could unlock a mystery that has been hidden for years." As they processed this new revelation, a sense of unease began to invade them. They knew they were stepping into unknown territory, and that the treasure mentioned in the diary was wrapped not only in material wealth, but also in a history of betrayal and danger. How many others had tried to find it? How many had failed? And most importantly, who would be willing to do anything to obtain it now? Manuel's words warned of the risks involved in unearthing the past. The treasure contained not only riches, but also secrets that, if revealed, could destroy more than they would heal. This warning, hidden in the final paragraphs of the diary, made them hesitate for a moment. "Josh, are we sure we want to pursue this?" Megan asked, feeling a chill as she read those words. "This isn't just a family story. It seems like there's more at stake than we thought." Josh, though worried, felt there was no turning back now. The ring, the legacy of his family, and now the promise of hidden treasure called him to continue. "Megan, I don't know what awaits us, but I can't ignore this. It's part of my story, of who I am. If there's anything I can discover about my family, about what happened to them, I have to move forward. But if you don't want to, you don't have to come with me." Megan looked at him, her love for him stronger than any fear. She knew Josh needed to uncover the truth, and she wouldn't leave him alone. "Let's go together. No matter what happens, we'll be okay," she replied, gripping his hand firmly. As they prepared to leave the villa, a strange sensation accompanied them. They knew they had taken the first step towards something much larger than themselves. The diary had revealed fragments of the truth, but had also left many questions unanswered. However, they were not alone in their search. In the distance, hidden among the shadows of the trees surrounding the villa, mysterious figures observed silently. They were not the only ones who knew about the ring and the hidden treasure. Since they had begun their investigation, someone else had been following their steps, and the warnings they had received in the form of anonymous threats now seemed much more real. The path to the truth was fraught with danger, and the story of the family treasure was not merely a mystery to be solved. It was a legacy that had claimed lives in the past and now threatened to claim more in the present. The abandoned villa had revealed secrets that Josh and Megan could never have imagined. The discovery of Manuel de la Vega's diary, Josh's great-grandfather, had unearthed more than just a simple family story. An ancient treasure, a betrayal that had brought down his family's dynasty, and the ring as the key to unraveling it all. Yet, what had started as a quest to understand his past had now become much more dangerous. They were not alone in this pursuit. Back home, Josh and Megan couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following them. Since they found the diary, small details that had once gone unnoticed now seemed alarming. Shadows moving in the distance, cars that appeared to trail them from afar, and even people acting suspiciously as they passed by. The air was thick with tension. One night, while having dinner at Megan's house, Josh's phone vibrated with an anonymous message. It was a clear warning. "Stop searching for the past if you value your future." Josh froze, his heart pounding. He showed the message to Megan, who read it with a tense expression. There was no doubt someone was closely monitoring their every move. "This isn't a coincidence, Josh. They're watching us," Megan said, a mix of fear and concern in her voice. Josh nodded, clenching his fist tightly. The danger was now real, and it affected not only their quest for the treasure, but also their relationship and safety. "I don't know who's behind this, but we can't give up now. If they want us to stop searching, it's because there's something significant they don't want us to uncover. This treasure is more than just a legend, Megan. It's part of my story, and I won't let them stop us that easily," Josh replied, determination ringing in his voice. But Megan, ever cautious, knew they had to proceed carefully. The Smiths weren't the only ones who desired power and control. If Josh's hidden family treasure was as valuable as the diary claimed, more people, possibly dangerous ones, would be interested in it. That very night, as they tried to sleep, a loud bang shook the front door of Megan's house. The sound resonated in the silence, causing both of them to jump out of bed. Josh rushed to the entrance while Megan followed, frightened. When he opened the door, they found a letter lying on the ground, next to a stone that had been thrown against the door. Another threat. "You've been warned. If you continue, you will pay dearly." The message, handwritten in twisted and aggressive letters, made it clear that someone was willing to do anything to stop their investigation. Megan, now more worried than ever, looked at Josh with her heart in her throat. "Josh, this isn't just a warning. They're threatening us. We can't ignore it." Josh, although worried, knew that if they stopped now, they would be giving in to fear. The danger was real, but so was the truth he was about to uncover. They couldn't turn back. "We're not going to stop, Megan. If they're threatening us, it's because we're closer to the truth than they'd like. But we need to be more careful. We can't trust anyone," Josh said, clenching his jaw. The next day, Josh decided it was time to share what they had found at the villa with his grandmother. She had always been his pillar and guide, and Josh needed to know if there were more details she knew about the treasure and the betrayals that had destroyed his family. When they arrived at his grandmother's house, Megan noticed how the presence of the elderly woman slightly calmed Josh's nerves. After listening attentively to what they had discovered in the villa and the threats they had received, his grandmother sighed deeply. "I knew the ring held more secrets than I ever told you, Josh, but I didn't know they would put you in such danger. I always knew our family fell from grace due to betrayals and greed, but I never imagined that treasure would continue to be a burden for you all these years," she said, sadness in her eyes. "Do you know anything else about the treasure, Grandma? Anything that could help us uncover who is behind all this?" Josh asked. His grandmother stared at him intently, searching her memory. "The only thing I remember is that your great-grandfather always said the ring was the key, but also a curse. He believed the treasure would bring more problems than solutions. The power and wealth it represented had destroyed our family once, and he feared it would do so again. Perhaps you shouldn't continue searching, Josh. Maybe this will only bring you more pain." Josh remained silent for a moment, processing his grandmother's words. Was it worth continuing this quest if it was putting his life and Megan's at risk? But deep down, he knew the weight of his family's legacy rested on his shoulders. If they didn't uncover the truth, they would always be living under the shadow of threats and danger. Determined, Josh thanked his grandmother and, along with Megan, left the house. They knew they had to move forward, but with caution. Meanwhile, Megan's parents, Victoria and Richard, continued to maneuver their pieces on the chessboard. Although they had seemingly softened their attitude toward Josh, they were now fully focused on discovering how to exploit the connection of the ring to the ancient fortune of Josh's family. The report from the private detective they had hired had given them leads, but had also warned them about the dangers surrounding the treasure. "We can't sit back and do nothing, Richard. If they discover the treasure before we do, all the power and fortune we could have controlled will disappear," Victoria said, her tone dripping with ambition. Richard, always cold and calculating, nodded. "We know the ring is the key. We just need to find a way to make Josh hand it over without him suspecting. In the meantime, we'll have someone keep a close watch on him. We can't let him proceed without knowing everything." The danger was intensifying. Josh and Megan were not only dealing with anonymous threats, but were also pushing the Smiths to their limit. They didn't realize that their movements were being closely monitored by various people, each with their own hidden motives for finding the treasure. Days later, while Josh reviewed his great-grandfather's diary again, he noticed something he had previously overlooked. A reference to a hidden place in the mountains, an old storage house where, according to Manuel's words, the last clues about the treasure's whereabouts could be found. With the map in hand and the ring as the key, Josh and Megan knew they were one step away from discovering the truth, but also from facing those who didn't want them to do so. The search for the treasure had ceased to be a simple family adventure. Now, every step they took brought them closer to the truth, but also to a danger that became more tangible with each passing moment. The only question that remained was, could they find the treasure before their enemies stopped them? The cold afternoon wind swept through Josh's neighborhood. In his workshop, the sound of the saw cutting through wood was the only thing breaking the silence of the room. But his mind wasn't entirely on his work. Since he and Megan had discovered the references to the hidden storage house in his great-grandfather's diary, he couldn't stop thinking about what they might find there. Was it truly the place where the treasure was hidden? And if so, what risks would they face in trying to reach it? As Josh continued working, a dark shadow loomed over his closest relationship. Thomas, his best friend, had changed in recent months, and Josh could feel it. They didn't talk as much as before, and when they did, there was a coldness and distance that hadn't existed in the old days. Josh had tried not to give it much thought, believing it was the weight of the family tensions with the Smiths, but Thomas's behavior weighed heavily on his mind. What Josh didn't know was that Thomas had already crossed a line that would change their lives forever. Blinded by jealousy, resentment, and the frustration of feeling left out by Josh's relationship with Megan, Thomas had given in to the insinuations and manipulations of Victoria and Richard Smith. Megan's family had been cunning, using Thomas's insecurities to sow the seeds of silent betrayal. A few days prior, Thomas had met with Victoria in a cafe away from the neighborhood, where he had offered more information about Josh and his quest for the treasure. Victoria had treated him with a mix of manipulation and promises, suggesting that if he collaborated with them, they would generously reward him. Thomas, feeling increasingly distanced from Josh and pulled by his own insecurities, had yielded. The betrayal was in motion. That afternoon, while Josh worked in his shop, Thomas entered unannounced. He looked tense, but he tried to mask his nervousness. For him, every second spent near Josh reminded him of what he was about to do, and guilt began to weigh on his conscience. He was betraying his best friend, someone who had been like a brother to him. "Hey, Josh, how's it going?" Thomas asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice had a forced tone. Josh looked up, putting down his tools. He knew something was strange about Thomas's behavior, but he didn't want to confront the truth. He preferred to believe that everything would go back to how it was before. "All good, Thomas. And you?" "It's been a while since we talked," Josh replied, managing a slight smile, although he also sensed the tension between them. Thomas nodded, but in his mind, an internal battle was raging. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but it was too late to turn back. Victoria and Richard were already aware of the storage house's location, all thanks to the information he had given them. The Smiths planned to use that information to get ahead of Josh and Megan, ensuring that if there was any treasure to recover, they would control it, not Josh. But Thomas lacked the courage to tell Josh what he had done. He could only try to act normally, hoping Josh wouldn't uncover the truth until it was too late. "Hey, Josh, I've heard rumors about what you and Megan are looking for," Thomas said, trying to make it sound casual. "Is it true that you found something important about your family? I mean, about that ring you gave Megan?" Josh, who had until that moment been reserved about the subject, couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. How did Thomas know so much about the ring and the investigation? He had kept it a secret, only sharing it with Megan and his grandmother. He was starting to get the strange feeling that his friend knew more than he should. "I've found some things, yes, but it's a delicate matter, Thomas. I don't want to involve too many people until we know more," Josh responded, hoping that his cautious tone wouldn't offend his friend. Thomas nodded, but his face showed a mix of remorse and anxiety. He knew he had crossed a line he couldn't undo. He had betrayed Josh. Yet at that moment, all he wanted was to escape, to flee from the guilt that consumed him. "I understand. Well, I just wanted to check on you." "I'll see you later, Josh," Thomas said, quickly walking out of the workshop, leaving Josh even more confused by his behavior. Josh, watching Thomas leave, couldn't shake the growing sense of betrayal rising in his chest. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't want to believe that his closest friend could betray him in such a way. He didn't yet know the whole truth, but the bond between them was already broken, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences unfolded. That same night, Josh and Megan decided they couldn't wait any longer. With the map from the diary and the ring as the key, they knew they had to head to the storage house in the mountains as soon as possible. If the treasure was truly there, so too would be the truth about the downfall of Josh's family. What they didn't know was that Victoria and Richard Smith, thanks to Thomas's betrayal, had already set a plan in motion to get ahead of them. Before departing, Josh decided to confront his grandmother once more. He felt there was still something he didn't know, something his grandmother had kept hidden. "Grandma, I know you've told me a lot about the ring and the treasure, but is there anything else I should know before we go to that storage house?" Josh asked, concern in his voice. His grandmother, appearing more fragile than ever, looked at him with eyes full of sadness. "Josh, I've shared what I know, but you must remember that this treasure, it's not just made of material wealth. It's filled with stories of betrayal, sacrifice, and decisions that destroyed our family. I don't know what you'll find there, but I want you to understand that no matter what happens, your worth isn't in that treasure. It's in the life you're building. Don't let the shadows of the past consume you." Her words resonated in his mind as he and Megan made their way to the storage house. They knew danger was near, but they still didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what they were facing. As Josh and Megan approached the storage house, Victoria and Richard Smith were already on the move. With the information Thomas had given them, they had sent a group of trusted men to watch the place and ensure that if there was anything to discover, they would be the first to know. But what the Smiths didn't realize was that they were not the only ones interested in the treasure. The threats Josh and Megan had received didn't only come from them, but from others who were also tracking the ring. When Josh and Megan arrived at the storage house, the atmosphere was charged with tension. The place was hidden among the mountains, surrounded by dense vegetation and an air of abandonment. The door, rusted and heavy, seemed not to have been opened in decades. With the ring in hand, Josh turned the ancient lock, and the metallic sound of the gears echoed in the silence. Inside, the storage house was dark and cold. The stone floor, covered in dust, creaked beneath their feet as they cautiously moved forward. However, before they could inspect the place, they heard footsteps behind them. Turning around, they saw Thomas, who had secretly followed them. His face showed a mix of regret and desperation. "Josh, I'm sorry. I didn't want to betray you, but I couldn't stop myself. The Smiths, they manipulated me, made me believe this was best for you," Thomas said, his voice breaking with guilt. Josh, shocked by his friend's confession, couldn't hide his anger and disappointment. "What did you do, Thomas? Why did you betray us? We were like brothers," he shouted, his voice filled with pain. "I don't know, Josh. I was lost. But now it's too late," Thomas replied, tears welling in his eyes. Before they could process what was happening, the men sent by the Smiths burst into the storage house, armed and ready to take whatever they found inside. Time was running out, and now not only the treasure, but their lives were in danger. The dark and cold storage house was charged with tension. Josh, Megan, and Thomas found themselves trapped in a desperate situation. The men sent by Victoria and Richard Smith had arrived, and the weapons they carried made it clear they were not there to negotiate. The echo of their footsteps reverberated off the stone walls as they advanced toward them. "Josh, we didn't want this to end like this," one of the men said in a threatening tone. "Give us whatever you found here, and no one will get hurt." Thomas, weighed down by guilt, tried to stand firm, but his betrayal had already put everyone in danger. He knew he had fallen for the Smiths' manipulations, but now it was too late to undo what he had done. Josh, still furious from the betrayal, understood that there was no time for arguments or harboring resentment. His priority was to protect Megan and save their lives. "I don't know what treasure you're talking about," Josh replied, slowly backing away while scanning the storage house. At that moment, Megan, who had been scanning the storage house with her eyes, noticed something strange. A small opening in a stone wall at the back of the room, barely visible behind a broken shelf. The hiding place. She knew that had to be where the treasure was hidden. "Josh, look at that," she whispered, subtly pointing. As the Smith men advanced, Josh and Megan dashed toward the wall. With the ring in hand, Josh inserted it into a small hole that matched the engraved symbol on the rock. A hidden mechanism began to turn, and the wall slowly slid open, revealing a small secret chamber. Inside, there weren't piles of gold or jewels as many might have imagined. Instead, there were ancient documents, letters, and records that narrated the true history of Josh's family. The documents revealed how the family had been betrayed by close allies, the very ones responsible for their downfall. But most importantly, those papers contained powerful rights to forgotten lands and properties, assets that, if reclaimed, would restore to Josh the fortune that his family had once lost. The true treasure was not material. It was an inheritance of legal rights and territories. Just then, the Smith men realized what Josh and Megan had found. Without hesitation, they rushed forward to seize the documents. But Thomas, finally aware of his mistake and seeking redemption, stepped between them and Josh. "No more!" Thomas shouted, a mix of determination and desperation in his voice. "I've caused enough harm. This belongs to Josh. It's not yours." Thomas's sacrifice allowed Josh and Megan to escape the men, taking the documents with them. Although there were no visible riches, the true treasure was the restoration of his legacy and control over the lands that they now knew belonged to them. Fleeing through the night, Josh and Megan understood that the fight for that treasure had only just begun. The truth of Josh's past had come to light, but now they had to face the Smiths and anyone who sought to take from them what rightfully belonged to them. The ring, initially dismissed, had proven to be far more valuable than anyone had imagined. Josh and Megan had escaped the storage house with the documents that revealed the true legacy of Josh's family. Now, armed with evidence that demonstrated the betrayal that destroyed his family and the rights to the lost lands, they were determined to confront the Smiths. They knew they could no longer run. It was time to put an end to the manipulations and reclaim their future. Back in the city, Victoria and Richard, furious at being outsmarted, had already begun to mobilize their power to prevent Josh from claiming what belonged to him. They had underestimated the strength of the relationship between Josh and Megan, and now they faced the reality that the man they despised had not only exceeded their expectations, but also possessed something that interested them more than anything else: power. Josh and Megan decided to confront the Smiths in their own home. The tension in the mansion was palpable as they came face to face. Richard greeted them coldly, while Victoria maintained her calculating demeanor. The final battle wouldn't be fought with violence, but with words and truth. "I've come to reclaim what is mine," Josh declared, displaying the documents. "I know what you did to my family, and now I have proof of the rights to the lands and properties that belong to my ancestors. This ends here." Victoria, realizing they could no longer control the situation as they wished, attempted one last move. "Josh, we can still reach an agreement. We know what those papers mean, but with our influence, we could help you reclaim what's rightfully yours. All we ask is that you reconsider your place in our family. Think about what you could gain," she said, her tone filled with a mix of arrogance and desperation. But Josh didn't waver. He had been through too much to back down now. "I don't want your money or your power. I just want Megan and me to live an authentic life, free from your manipulations. You control nothing anymore. This is my legacy, and it's something my family lost due to the greed and betrayal of people like you." "I refuse to repeat that story," Josh responded firmly. Megan, who had remained silent until now, finally stepped forward, looking at her parents with sadness. "You've always sought to control me, to use me as a tool for your ambitions. But that's over. My life is with Josh, and if you can't accept that, then you'll lose your daughter as well." Megan's decision was clear. Richard, furious and defeated, could do nothing but accept reality. Victoria, seeing there were no more cards to play, remained silent, unable to change the course of what was happening. Days later, Josh and Megan celebrated an intimate wedding, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. The villa that had once been in ruins, the same one they discovered during their search, was now a symbol of their new beginning. They decided to restore it not only as a symbol of their family history, but also as a place where those in need could find refuge. Thomas, remorseful for his actions, attended the wedding, seeking redemption. Josh, though still hurt by the betrayal, forgave him. He knew that holding on to resentment would only tie him to the past, and he had decided to look towards the future. The ring, once scorned by the Smiths, now shone with more significance than ever on Megan's finger. It was no longer just a symbol of their love. It represented the story they had reclaimed together. The fight for their love and for the family legacy had ended, and now Josh and Megan walked towards a hopeful future, knowing that the true treasure had always been within themselves and in the life they were building together. And so concludes this incredible story, where we learned that true value lies not in luxury or appearances, but in love, honesty, and the legacy we build together. If it has inspired you as much as it has inspired us, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so that more people can enjoy this journey filled with emotions, betrayals, and redemption. Thank you for joining us until the end. And remember, sometimes the most valuable treasure is found in the people we love, not in what we possess. See you in the next story.